Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophet Samuel 1, chapter 26, in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're stepping right into the middle of, honestly, one of the most intense manhunts in ancient history. Just imagine this for a second. You're being hunted by an entire army, led by the very king you faithfully served your whole life. And then, suddenly out of nowhere, the tables turn. You find yourself with the ultimate upper hand. You could end it all right there. That is the exact real-life historical situation we are analyzing today.
Okay, let's dive into this explainer. We're going to deliberately and meticulously break down this text, verse by verse, to really uncover the literal events of this drama. We'll start with the desert chase, look at how David infiltrates Saul's camp, check out his bold confrontation with the army, listen to his plea to King Saul, and then wrap up with some key themes and really practical life lessons.
All right, part 1. We open up verses 1 through 4 with a pretty severe betrayal. The Ziphites, these are locals from the area of Zip, they go straight to King Saul at Gibeah, and they completely rat David out. They reveal his exact hiding spot, telling Saul that David is on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon, basically the desolate wasteland. Now, fueled by all this paranoia, Saul immediately mobilizes his forces and marches down, camping right by the road. But David, he's hiding deep in the desert. He doesn't just blindly walk into this trap. Instead, he acts incredibly strategically.
To truly grasp the sheer, overwhelming scale of the danger David faces here, we have to look at the numbers the text gives us in verse 2. Saul brings down to the desert of Ziph not just a tiny search party. No, he brings 3,000 chosen men of Israel. 3,000. This is a massive elite military force assembled for the sole hyper-focused purpose of hunting down one single man. When David sees that Saul has actually followed him all the way out there, he doesn't panic. He sends out his own scouts and definitively verifies that yes, the threat is literally right on his doorstep.
So, this puts us right in the middle of incredible suspense. With a formidable army of 3,000 elite soldiers tracking him, the chase is quite literally over. The enemy has arrived. So we must ask ourselves, what will David do now? Is he going to try to run further into the desolate wasteland? Or is he finally going to take matters into his own hands and take revenge on the man who has relentlessly sought his life? Moving into verses 5 through 12, rather than retreating, David does the absolute unthinkable. Under the heavy cover of darkness, he and a volunteer, his nephew Abishai, they sneak directly into the very center of the enemy camp. It's an insanely bold move. And what do they find? They find King Saul fast asleep, with his spear stuck right in the ground near his head, completely unguarded. And keep in mind, Saul is surrounded by his top commander, Abner, and the entire army, but they're all out cold.
In verse 8, Abishai looks at this incredibly vulnerable king, the very man who has caused David so much misery and suffering, and he whispers this to David. He says, "Today God has given your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." From a purely military and human perspective, Abishai's logic is perfectly sound, right? It's a clean, lethal, one-and-done solution to end all their suffering instantly.
So the crucial point is how David actually reacts. He flat out refuses Abishai's deadly offer. In verses 9 through 11, David explicitly says, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" David states so clearly that the Lord himself will strike Saul whenever his time comes, but David absolutely refuses to be the executioner. Instead, he executes this flawless, stealthy alternative. He tells Abishai to simply grab the spear and the water jug resting right by Saul's head. They gather the items and just walk right out. Verse 12 notes that no one saw it, no one knew it, and no one even woke up. Talk about heavy sleepers. But the text actually gives us the literal reason why. It says a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon the entire army. It was divine intervention that kept them snoring.
Now, looking at verses 13 through 16, David and Abishai successfully slip away into the night. But David doesn't just disappear into the shadows. He crosses over a valley, making sure to create a massive, completely safe physical gap. He climbs up to the top of a distant hill, and from there he breaks the silence of the night, shouting across the entire canyon directly to the army's top commander, Abner.
So Abner wakes up and is totally confused and irritated. He shouts back, "Who are you who calls to the king?" And David just unleashes this incredibly bold, sarcastic, mocking taunt in verses 15 and 16. He yells, "You're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king?" David publicly dresses down the kingdom's top general in front of everyone, pointing out his total, humiliating failure to protect his master from an intruder who had walked right up to him.
Then, David delivers the absolute proof, the ultimate mic drop. He tells Abner to look around. Where are the king's spear and the water jug that were near his head? By displaying this physical stolen evidence from all the way across the canyon, David definitively proves to the entire army that he had absolute, unrestricted access to the king. He had the weapon, he had the perfect opportunity, but he deliberately chose mercy over murder.
This brings us to verses 17 through 25. All of this commotion wakes King Saul up, and he instantly recognizes David's voice. "Is that your voice, David my son?" he asks. And David launches into this desperate, perfectly logical plea. "Why is my lord pursuing his servant?" he asks. He essentially challenges Saul to explain the root of this hunt. He asks, "Is this driven by God, or is it driven by malicious men who have slandered him and driven David away from his homeland and his share in the Lord's inheritance?"
And this brilliantly illustrates the utter mismatch of this entire conflict. In verse 20, David begs Saul not to let his blood fall to the ground far from the Lord's presence. And to really drive the point home, he uses two incredibly powerful plain text metaphors to describe his own status. He compares himself to a single flea and a partridge in the mountains. By calling himself a flea, he's highlighting his complete insignificance compared to the might of the king of Israel. And by mentioning hunting a partridge, a bird you'd chase tirelessly through the Rocky Hills for virtually no reward, he's pointing out the absolute absurdity of assembling 3,000 elite warriors just to chase down one harmless individual. It's total overkill.
Well, this undeniable logic, combined with the physical proof of David's mercy, finally breaks through Saul's thick wall of paranoia. In verse 21, we see a really dramatic and emotional shift. Saul just sort of crumbles. He admits his guilt with deep exhaustion and defeat. He says, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. I have acted like a fool and have erred greatly." Saul openly acknowledges his own foolishness, and he repents of his murderous intent right there, out loud, in front of all his troops.
But listen, despite Saul's emotional words, David is not naive. He maintains a wise, safe distance. In verses 22 through 25, David doesn't go back over to Saul. Instead, he tells one of Saul's young men to come over and get the king's spear. David firmly declares his trust in God alone, rather than in Saul's temporary apology. He states that the Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. He prays that just as he highly valued Saul's life that day, the Lord will value his life and deliver him. Saul responds with a final prophetic blessing, telling David he will indeed do great things and triumph. And after this, they part ways. David goes on his way, and Saul returns home.
Let's move to and see how this builds our understanding of the core, simple concepts that anchor this text. Taking a quick pause from the timeline, understanding these themes is absolutely crucial to grasping why the events unfolded exactly as they did. The absolute most critical concept in this entire chapter is the idea of the Lord's anointed, or the Mashiach in Hebrew. Now, this isn't just a fancy political title. It literally signifies a leader who has been chosen, anointed, and appointed directly by God. And this is the exact literal reason David refused to strike Saul. Even though Saul was acting completely unjustly and out of his mind, David profoundly respected God's initial appointment. David firmly decided, look, I'm going to let God handle the timeline of Saul's reign and his eventual death. He refused to take personal vengeance against God's anointed.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clearly these two leadership mindsets contrast with one another. You have Saul's approach on one side. It's characterized by this relentless pursuit, deep-seated paranoia, and a massive, overbearing reliance on physical might in armies. And on the flip side, you have David's approach, marked by profound self-restraint, tactical stealth, and a total, unwavering reliance on divine justice rather than the tip of his own spear.
All right, section 6. History is a profound teacher, right? So let's shift gears and focus entirely on what actionable, practical wisdom we can draw from David's literal actions out there in the desert of Ziph.
Take a look at these lessons from David's example because they really apply to us today. First, controlling intense anger even when presented with a perfect opportunity. When you've been wronged and the chance to strike back presents itself flawlessly, like on a silver platter, true strength is actually holding back. Second, respecting authority and divine timing. We've got to recognize that sometimes we just have to wait for things to resolve rightfully rather than forcing an outcome ourselves. Third, letting God handle vengeance and ultimate justice. David knew it simply wasn't his job to be the executioner. And finally, using undeniable proof and words instead of violence. Think about it. David completely de-escalated a massive war using nothing but a water jug, a stolen spear, and some sharp logical arguments. Clear communication is infinitely more powerful than destruction.
I'll leave you with this thought to reflect on today. If you were handed your greatest adversary on a silver platter, would you have the restraint to walk away? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.